I will never forget the morning my world came crashing down. If someone had told me that a heart could shatter into pieces from a few icy words, I would have scoffed. That was until I saw the man I adored walk away, leaving me alone with our tiny newborn twins. I naively believed that love was all-powerful, that together we were an invincible fortress. How wrong I was. Love proved powerless against greed, exorbitant ambitions, and the insidious manipulations of a woman who called herself a mother. That day, I realized with horror that my children and I had never been part of his world, never truly belonged to him. I met Ethan Sterling on one of those magical autumn days when the streets of New York were awash in a golden carpet of fallen leaves. I was an aspiring interior designer, full of hope and ambition, having just moved to the city after college. And Ethan Sterling, he was the heir to the vast real estate empire, Montgomery & Co., an influential family that owned luxurious properties from Manhattan to Los Angeles. But I didn't know that then. That day, in a small, cozy cafe, he was just a charming guy with an enchanting smile and eyes the color of a clear sky that sparkled when he looked at me. He was far from the man who carried the weight of an entire dynasty on his shoulders. We fell in love quickly, as often happens in youth when hearts beat in unison and the future seems bright and full of hope. Ethan. He wasn't like those wealthy people who flaunt their wealth. No arrogance, no conceit, just kindness, tenderness, and the feeling that I was the center of his universe. The first months of our love were the brightest time of my life. I loved him madly, not yet understanding that love alone would not be enough to withstand the crushing pressure of the Montgomery name and its centuries-old legacy. When I told Ethan about the pregnancy, he literally lit up with happiness. Holding me tight, he vowed to protect both me and our baby, no matter what it cost. But alas, neither love nor promises were enough to resist his mother, Eleanor Sterling, a woman with piercing gray eyes and a heart of steel. I remember our first meeting as if it were yesterday. Just a week after Ethan found out about the baby, she invited us to a lavish reception at the Montgomery estate. Crystal chandeliers flooded the walls with light, adorned with canvases by great masters. Crossing the threshold, I immediately realized I was an outsider here. Ladies in elaborate evening gowns gave me assessing, cold looks, as if scanning me for suitability. The family's business partners, men in stern suits, glided past me as if I were invisible in this hall, steeped in power and ambition. In the center of this snake pit sat Eleanor Sterling. In her hand was a glass of ruby wine, and her gaze was like two shards of ice, scrutinizing me from head to toe. No open aggression, just a smile stretched taut like a string, behind which contempt was hidden. I felt in my gut that she had already passed judgment on me, without saying a word. "Ethan says you're expecting a child," she said, and there was not a drop of warmth in her voice, only a statement of fact. What a surprise! I was speechless. My hand convulsively squeezed Ethan's, feeling his body tense. He tried to force a smile, wanting to diffuse the situation, but there was anxiety in his eyes. Eleanor didn't give me another word that evening, but I knew it was just the calm before the storm. And my fears were confirmed. After a few days, Ethan seemed like a different person. Distant, lost in thought, he tossed and turned at night without sleep, and his phone was ringing off the hook with mysterious calls from his mother. He insisted that everything was fine, assured me that I had nothing to worry about, but the anxiety inside me only grew with each passing day. By the time our twins were born, I already felt in my gut that something was wrong. Ethan, still within the hospital walls, gave me a gentle smile, carefully holding our babies in his arms, but there was a chasm between us, an invisible wall that I could not overcome. And then, on that fateful morning, the truth crashed down on me. Ethan walked into our modest apartment with an extinguished gaze and drooping shoulders, as if carrying an unbearable burden. I, holding our newborns in my arms, gently rocked them, trying to calm them. Seeing him, I smiled, anticipating the beginning of our new life together. But the smile immediately faded, confronted with the expression on his face. "We need to talk," he whispered, as if exhaling. I carefully put the children in their cribs and turned to him, feeling anxiety grip my whole body. "What happened, Ethan?" He didn't answer right away. He swallowed hard, looking away. "I can't anymore," he finally squeezed out, his voice trembling and sounding as if from afar. "I just can't." At that moment, my heart stopped. "Can't what?" Ethan took a deep breath, as if exhaling life itself. It felt like the words he was about to say would shatter everything between us. I have to leave." The room instantly turned cold, as if a door to an icy desert had been flung open. My heart clenched painfully, as if pierced by 1,000 shards of glass. "Leave," I whispered, barely audible. My voice trembled, betraying the depth of my despair. "What do you mean?" Ethan looked at me with tormented eyes, yet there was no hint of doubt in them. The decision had been made, and he wouldn't back down. "My mother was right," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "We're from different worlds. I can't stay." Tears streamed down my face, burning my cheeks. I shook my head desperately, refusing to believe what I was hearing. "You're leaving me? Leaving your children just because she said so?" Ethan was silent, looking down. In that moment, I realized that the man I loved was gone. Standing before me was just a pathetic coward, a puppet in the hands of his domineering mother, willing to betray his wife and children to preserve his precious inheritance. Ethan abruptly turned his back on me and headed for the door. I wanted to scream, to rush to him, to beg him to stay, but my body felt paralyzed by ice. I couldn't move. "I'm sorry," he tossed over his shoulder, not daring to look me in the eye. There was no remorse in his voice, only weary resignation. The door slammed shut, cutting me off from the world and leaving me alone with newborn twins and a gaping hole in my chest. I froze, staring at that treacherous panel, behind which Ethan had just disappeared. A faint, desperate hope still flickered within me, whispering that he would come to his senses, that the door would swing open again, and he would say that it was all a terrible dream. But the silence was merciless. In that cramped apartment, only I and two tiny bundles remained, innocent creatures not yet aware of the terrible loss that had befallen their mother. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down my cheeks as I looked at them, helplessly lying in their crib. They didn't yet know that their father had just erased them from his life, leaving me alone to bear the burden of raising them. The first few days after Ethan left were like being plunged into utter darkness. I couldn't swallow a bite, couldn't close my eyes, couldn't do anything but hold my children close and cry into my pillow night after night. The apartment felt huge, empty, and permeated with icy cold. Every whimper, every tiny cry echoed painfully off the walls, mingling with my own muffled sobs. I was drained to the last drop, physically and emotionally devastated. My body ached after childbirth, but that physical pain seemed insignificant compared to the gnawing feeling of abandonment. I couldn't get Ethan's gaze out of my head, full of guilty confusion but not genuine struggle. He had chosen the cowardly path, simply running away. All the vows of love and loyalty had instantly turned into empty words. In those days, I felt like a stranger in my own body. I allowed myself to drown in a sea of despair, erecting an impenetrable wall around myself. The phone rang incessantly. Friends, acquaintances, just sympathetic people tried to reach me, but I didn't answer. How could I look them in the eye? What could I say when all that remained inside were shards of a broken heart and two tiny creatures completely dependent on me? But one night, to the accompaniment of a furious rain drumming against the window, a simple and brutal truth finally dawned on me, which I had been trying to ignore for so long. I no longer have time to grieve. These two little souls desperately need me. If I continue to wallow in despair, who will take care of them? Who will hold them close when they get sick? Who will give them the love and warmth they so desperately need? Ethan decided to abandon them, but I never could. Wiping away my tears and summoning my courage, I ordered myself to get up for the first time in days. The next day, I rushed to find a job full of hopes that were cruelly shattered by reality. Before my pregnancy, I worked at a cozy interior design firm in Manhattan. But as my delivery approached, preparing for the arrival of my precious twins, I had to temporarily step away from work. After the tragic loss of Ethan, I dreamed of returning, but my position had been filled, doors slammed in my face. Who would want to hire a single mother with newborn children? An employee unable to stay late or accommodate a flexible schedule. I sent out countless resumes, but each one came back like a boomerang, stamped with rejection. Some recruiters bluntly stated that I wasn't suitable because my children would require too much attention. Others, more tactful, explained that they needed someone fully committed to their work, which in their opinion was impossible in my situation. Each rejection email pierced my heart like a shard of glass, reminding me of my helplessness. But I had no right to give up. There simply was no other way out. There were days when despair suffocated me, and it seemed like there was no hope left. But the moment I looked into the clear, innocent eyes of my children, a new source of strength seemed to ignite within me, forcing me to move forward. I cut all expenses to a minimum and learned to live in strict austerity. A nanny was out of the question, so I had to manage everything myself. Sleepless nights were now caused not only by grief, but also by the children waking up in the middle of the night, demanding attention. I learned to change diapers with one hand, while browsing endless job listings with the other. My only hope was for remote work that would allow me to earn money without being away from my children. And after several weeks of diligent searching, luck smiled on me. I got a freelance position in a small interior design company. The salary was modest, but it was enough to cover the most essential needs. I worked late into the night when the children were already sleeping peacefully, and the only source of light in the dark room was the flickering screen of my computer. The following months turned into a real battle for survival. I was a mother, an employee, and the sole support of my family. There were days when fatigue crashed down on me like a stone block, and I dreamed of only one thing: giving up. But I had no right to. I had already lost too much to allow myself to lose myself as well. Over time, I noticed that my pain was no longer as sharp. It was still there, lurking like an unhealed wound, but it no longer controlled me. I was no longer that weak woman crying in a dark corner. I am a mother of 2 children, and I will not let life break me. I didn't know what awaited me ahead, but I had finally set out on my path, and this time, I won't let anyone decide what my fate will be. I got used to the endless sleepless nights. When my little ones finally fell asleep, I sat down at the computer, and the pale blue light of the monitor gently touched my exhausted face. Freelancing in interior design barely covered our expenses, but I realized that this could not continue. I needed something more, something that would belong only to me. The idea sparked like a bright light one evening when I was, as usual, folding mountains of clothes for my mischievous twins. It suddenly occurred to me, all the children's clothing on the shelves is like a carbon copy. No uniqueness, no imagination. And if you do come across something original and well-made, the price is exorbitant, as if it's not clothing for babies, but an outfit for a queen. And the affordable stuff, it's better not to look. Crooked seams, protruding threads, fabric like sandpaper. And then the thought pierced me. Why not create clothing that is both beautiful, comfortable, and affordable? Yes, I am not a professional designer, but I have always loved creating something with my own hands. In childhood, my mother, who is no longer with us, taught me how to sew tiny dresses for my dolls. These skills have stayed with me, like my mother's blessing, and I decided to take a chance. I borrowed an old sewing machine from my good-natured neighbor downstairs and started with the simplest things: soft onesies for newborns, elastic leggings that don't restrict movement, and cute dresses for little princesses. At first, I sewed only for my rascals, but when I posted photos online, my friends bombarded me with questions. Where can I buy this? At that moment, I felt a spark of hope ignite inside me. I realized that I had a chance. I didn't have money for serious investments, but I had a huge, unwavering determination. Every spare dollar, every penny I invested in buying fabric and necessary materials. I believed that my dream was worth it. I honed my sewing skills to perfection, learned to create real works of art, and even decided to open my online store. God, how I underestimated all the difficulties. I put my work up for sale online, and in response, silence. I wrote letters to bloggers writing about motherhood and children, hoping for some kind of response, but all to no avail. Once I even received a tiny order, but the client changed her mind at the last moment. Rejection followed rejection, and doubts crept into my head. Is this just a waste of time? But one night, admiring my sleeping angels in pajamas sewn with my own hands, I realized I can't give up. Too much effort and soul had been invested to retreat. I decided to change tactics. I ordered a professional photo shoot of my products, created a small but stylish website, and started a blog where I frankly talked about my life as a single mother and how I am creating my brand from scratch. I joined groups for parents and social networks, shared my experience, trying not to impose my products, and gradually, step by step, the first orders began to arrive. Timid, uncertain, but so long awaited. My first customer was a young mother from Chicago. She ordered an adorable outfit for her newborn daughter. When the payment notification came through, I burst into tears. Not because of the money. No, it was something else. It was undeniable proof. I wasn't broken. I was still good for something. The first order was followed by a second, then a third. Soon, I started receiving heartfelt messages from mothers. They thanked me, showered me with praise, noting how soft and comfortable my clothes were for their baby's delicate skin. Some even sent photos of their little ones in my designs. Those tiny faces beaming with happiness. What could be better? I named my brand Little Blessings. After all, that's what my twins gave me, a reason to keep living, to not give up. The next few months turned into a never-ending battle. I worked like a dog, day and night, taking care of the children, sewing clothes, packaging orders, and managing my website. My humble apartment turned into a real mini workshop. Everywhere, Mountains of fabric, spools of thread, scattered across the floor. Every morning, I woke up before my rascals to answer customer emails. Day in and day out, while my little ones slept peacefully, I hunched over the sewing machine, conjuring magic with fabric. At night, when the house fell silent, I forgot about sleep, eagerly absorbing knowledge about marketing, advertising, and brand building. Exhaustion knocked me down, but inside me bubbled an energy I had never felt before. And then one day, out of the blue, something incredible happened. One of my posts went viral on social media. A well-known mom influencer on Instagram, the one I secretly admired, suddenly raved about little blessings. She praised the quality and exquisite design of my products. In an instant, my inbox turned into a bubbling cauldron, and the number of orders skyrocketed. I couldn't believe my eyes, rereading the emails over and over. I had to urgently call a friend, begging for help with packaging because I couldn't physically handle the onslaught of orders. Soon, I found a small local workshop to help me produce the most popular models. And so, in just 6 months, Little Blessings went from a humble online store to a recognizable brand in the children's fashion industry. I was no longer just fighting for survival, but building a future for myself and my children. For the first time in years, I was filled with pride in myself and what I had been able to do. I felt real. One evening, immersed in the routine of packing things for shipment, I suddenly received an email like a bolt from the blue, from a huge chain of stores for moms and babies, right from the heart of New York City. They wanted to collaborate, to present Little Blessings on their shelves. The phone slipped from my trembling hands. This was a chance I hadn't even dared to dream of. I turned and looked at my sleeping angels. My heart was so full of gratitude that it felt like it would burst. I had lost so much, but it was in that loss that I found myself, and I knew this was just the beginning. Who would have thought I'd be here today? From an abandoned woman desperately trying to survive in a tiny apartment with 2 babies, I had become the head of a thriving children's fashion brand. Little Blessings is no longer just a modest online store. It's a name that is known and respected in mom communities, that is written about in articles about women entrepreneurs, and that will finally proudly take its place on the shelves of major retail chains. Looking back on this journey, it still feels like a dream that once seemed absolutely impossible. But the most incredible thing about all of this is not the success or the money I've made. Incredibly, like a phoenix, I rose from the ashes, no longer that wretched woman crying into her pillow watching the back of a trader disappear. I stood up. I created a life I'm proud of, mine and mine alone. Every morning, waking up in a spacious apartment, hearing the ringing laughter of my rascals running through the rooms, I know I'm on the right path. No more counting pennies for milk. No more tossing and turning at night, figuring out how to make ends meet. Now I can give them a decent life, make plans for the future, without feeling that oppressive fear of uncertainty. But most importantly, I no longer hold a grudge against Ethan. At first, it seemed impossible to forgive him. He betrayed me at the most difficult moment, trading his family for money and power. But time heals, and I realized that resentment is shackles that chain you to the past. Ethan no longer has power over my life. His existence does not affect my path. And then, one day, looking at my work schedule, I saw a message from an unknown number. "Olivia, it's Ethan. We need to meet?" The message flashed on the screen, and a strange wave washed over me. Years, an eternity had passed since I last heard his name. Ethan. After he ripped himself out of my life, he simply vanished. I didn't know if he was still breathing the same air, if he was happy with his selfish choice. But it no longer mattered. My fingers froze over the keyboard. I put down my phone without replying. That day, I was immersed in the chaos of my small office, drowning in sketches and samples for the new collection. But my mind, the traitor, stubbornly returned to the past. This time, however, the memories didn't sting. I saw Ethan walking away, closing the door of our tiny apartment behind him, and felt that overwhelming, suffocating wave of despair. But I also remembered something else, the titanic effort I put in to piece myself back together. I was no longer that broken woman. I had become stronger, more resilient, independent. I no longer needed someone to feel whole. The following days flew by in a whirlwind of activity. An interview for an influential magazine about my thorny entrepreneurial path, an important meeting with a partner about expanding the brand, an avalanche of orders requiring immediate fulfillment. I was living on the edge, and I loved it. Each day was another step on the path I had chosen. And then one day, I saw Ethan again. It happened on a Sunday morning when I took the children to the park. Sitting on a bench and watching them play, I suddenly felt someone's gaze on me. Ethan was standing nearby, just a few steps away. He didn't look at all like the man I remembered. Where was the self-assured and proud man? Before me stood a tormented man, as if he had aged several years, with deep sadness in his eyes. He took a step towards me, but I didn't move, betraying no emotion. When he stopped right in front of me, I simply looked up at him, waiting. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," Ethan said, his voice hesitant. I was silent, gathering my thoughts. "Then why are you here?" I finally asked. Ethan glanced at the playing children and looked back at me. "I saw articles about you, read about your successes, and realized I was wrong." I wasn't surprised. I had been waiting for this moment. "You realize that a little too late," I replied calmly. Ethan smiled sadly. "I know." He looked down, the knuckles of his fingers white with tension. I just wanted to say that I'm so sorry. Not for your forgiveness, not in the hope of coming back, but because I am truly, deep down, sorry for what I did." I nodded almost imperceptibly. "Are you done?" Hey, he hesitated as if my question had thrown him off balance. I stared at him intently without a trace of anger or sadness in my eyes. "Ethan, I went through hell to become who I am now, and there's no room for you in my life anymore." Not another word. I simply got up and walked towards the children, leaving Ethan standing alone. I didn't turn around, didn't even glance at him, not caring whether he was watching me go. For the first time in years, I felt light, as if I had shed an unbearable burden. Ethan was a page in my history, but no longer the main character. The main character is me, and I won. Not him, but the pain of the past that had tormented me for so long. I walked forward, holding my children's hands, looking only ahead, without looking back, without regrets. Ethan was left alone in the huge, empty Montgomery estate. The silence pressed down, like a weight. Since he abandoned me and our children, he had received everything his mother had promised him: a prestigious career, immense wealth, a high position in society. But at what cost? And yet, neither the glitter of gala evenings, nor the flattery of high-ranking dignitaries, nor business triumphs, nor luxury vacations, nothing could heal the gaping emptiness in his soul. When the spotlights faded, when the admiring voices died down, Ethan was left alone with the oppressive silence. No one loved him truly, unconditionally, as I once had. And then one day, the world turned upside down. Ethan was sitting in his office when my voice, like a thunderclap, boomed from the huge TV on the wall. He flinched, sharply raising his head. On the screen, I, in person, was giving an interview on a morning talk show opposite a radiant host. "Your story is an incredible role model for so many women," the host said with sincere warmth in her voice. "From a single mother, abandoned by her husband, to the founder of a thriving children's fashion brand. Could you share your story with us?" I gave her a soft smile. My gaze was calm and full of confidence. Ethan had never seen me like this. At first, I doubted I could handle it, I confessed, but then I realized if I don't stand up for myself, no one will. I had my children, my little treasures who needed me, and I just couldn't let the ghosts of the past continue to hold me captive. Photos flashed on the screen. Here we are with the children in the park, laughing heartily, dressed in bright outfits designed by me. The host, with a warm smile, continued, "Your brand, Little Blessings, has caused a real sensation in the world of children's fashion. What lesson do you consider the most important, having come this far?" I smiled radiantly in response. "The most important thing is to learn to believe in yourself. I'm not the frightened woman I once was. Fear no longer binds me. I don't depend on anyone. I forged my own happiness." Ethan felt a painful clench in his chest. His gaze was glued to the screen, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. I had transformed beyond recognition. Gone was the fragile, broken woman he had once abandoned. I didn't just survive, I blossomed. In the last shot before the credits, I was hugging my children, and all three of us were glowing with happiness. Ethan abruptly turned off the television, but those images were already firmly lodged in his head. Suddenly, it dawned on him. He had made a mistake, a monstrous and irreparable mistake. For years, he had tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing, that leaving me was the only right decision. But now, seeing me so happy and strong without him, he realized with horror that he had lost the most valuable thing he had in his life. The unbearable thought that I had truly been able to let him go pierced his heart like a dagger. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his car keys and flew out of his huge estate. The words he would say hadn't yet formed in his head. He didn't know if I would even want to see him again, but he could no longer live with this gnawing regret. By the time he got to my apartment at breakneck speed, dusk had enveloped the city in a dense shroud. Everything had changed. He still remembered the small, cramped apartment, but now a spacious, elegant house stood before him, modern but with a sense of homey comfort. Ethan froze at the door, feeling his heart pounding wildly in his chest, beating a frantic rhythm. He couldn't predict my reaction, but he knew he had to risk it. With a trembling hand, he pressed the doorbell. Several agonizing seconds passed, and the door slowly opened. It was me, still me, but different. In every feature of her face, in every movement, there was an inner strength, confidence, and in her eyes, when she looked up at him, there was no trace of that former sadness. Ethan opened his mouth, trying to squeeze out a word, but his tongue seemed to stick to the roof of his mouth. I crossed my arms over my chest, and my voice, calm and even, sounded like a sentence. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" Ethan swallowed hard, trying to dislodge the lump in his throat. I saw you on TV." I remained silent, staring at him, waiting for him to continue. Ethan exhaled loudly, as if trying to quell the storm inside. "I was wrong, Olivia. It wasn't right from the start. I shouldn't have left you. I let my mother run my life, and in the end, I lost everything that was dear to me." I tilted my head slightly, trying to hide the storm of emotions behind a mask of composure. And only now you realize this, I said quietly, putting all the bitterness of the past into the question. Ethan nodded contritely, and sincere regret was reflected in his eyes. I know it's too late, but I need you to know, I sincerely regret it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't ask for a second chance. Just, I need you to know that you were the only one I ever truly loved. I looked at him for a long time, piercing him with my gaze, and finally, quietly but firmly replied, Ethan, I don't need that. He froze, as if struck by lightning. What? He breathed, not believing his ears. I smiled, but it wasn't a warm, soft smile, but rather a bitter smirk of liberation. I no longer need to know whether you loved me or not. I turned that page a long time ago. I've built a life I'm proud of, and there's no room for you in it anymore. Ethan stood like a statue, the hope in his eyes gradually fading, replaced by resignation to the undeniable truth. I finished looking him straight in the eye. You chose your path a long time ago, and so did I. I'm happy now, and I don't need the shadow of the past to darken my life, I said, trying to give my voice firmness, even though everything inside was trembling. Ethan lowered his head, and undisguised pain was reflected in his eyes. He understood that time could not be turned back. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage, and whispered softly, Take care of yourself, Ethan. With these words, I closed the door, leaving him standing alone. For a long second, Ethan froze, staring at the door that had closed in front of him. A light breeze ran through the street, as if whispering about his irreparable loss. He had everything, and then suddenly, nothing was left. And this time he realized with horror that there was no turning back. He stood as if made of stone, unable to move. Part of him desperately wanted to knock, to beg for forgiveness, for another chance, but common sense told him it was useless. I was no longer the naive girl who tearfully begged him to stay. I survived the pain. I rebuilt my life without him. And Ethan finally faced the bitter truth. He had lost me forever. He spun around sharply, his steps heavy and unsteady as he left the complex. A gust of biting wind slipped under his coat, but he didn't even notice. His entire being was consumed by one thought. He had lost everything that mattered to him. My words echoed in his head like a funeral knell. You're out of my life. The phrase cut into his memory like a sharp shard, but he had only himself to blame. When Ethan returned to Montgomery, the ancestral mansion loomed ominously against the inky sky. The golden light pouring from the tall windows seemed like a mockery. Majestic as ever, a symbol of power and wealth, everything he had once placed above family. But today, Ethan saw only a gaping void permeating every stone. He entered the vast hall where the stale air was filled with the pungent scent of oak and the cloying fragrance of his mother's expensive perfume. A perfect picture. Persian carpets with intricate patterns, heavy canvases in gilded frames, an arrangement of antique furniture calculated down to the smallest detail. But nowhere was there a sense of living warmth. Eleanor Sterling, as always, sat in her favorite armchair, thoughtfully twirling a glass of ruby wine in her slender fingers. At the sight of her entering son, she showed not the slightest surprise. "Where have you been?" Her voice, as always, was icy. Ethan didn't answer. Throwing his coat onto a chair, he walked to the bar and, without looking, filled a glass with whiskey. "I was with Olivia," he breathed, his voice sounding like sandpaper. The silence that hung in the room seemed deafening. Eleanor quietly placed the glass of wine on the table and let out a long, contemptuous sigh. "I suppose it has finally dawned on you that there is no longer a place for you in her life?" Ethan turned sharply to her, a dark storm in his eyes. You knew? A smirk touched her lips. Did you really believe that a woman you abandoned would sit and wait for your return forever? Eleanor's words made Ethan clench the glass in his hand until it hurt. You talk about it as if it's not your fault. Only a quiet, icy chuckle in response. My fault, Ethan? I merely pointed you down the path you were destined to take. You are the heir to Montgomery, not some ordinary man with a small, insignificant family. I gave you everything. Bitterness crept into his voice. Everything? Do you really think I have everything? He slammed the glass on the table and wine splashed onto the polished surface. I have money, I have a career, I have power. But you know what else I have? Emptiness. Every morning it crashes down on me here in this huge mansion. I go to the office, which is full of people, but they despise the real me. They worship the name, Montgomery. I am surrounded by them, but I have never felt so alone. Eleanor was silent, her face remaining a mask as she looked at her son. She betrayed not a single emotion. Ethan continued, his voice breaking. Olivia, she went ahead. She achieved everything herself without me. Our children grew up without me, and he broke into a bitter laugh. All I have left is this place, you, and all that you call everything. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, crossing her arms over her chest. And what do you want, Ethan? Do you expect me to apologize for helping you secure your future? In response, Ethan burst out laughing, but there was nothing in it but bitterness and disappointment. No, Mother, you never apologize. You never regret anything. He exhaled loudly, as if throwing off a heavy burden, and shook his head. And I regret everything. He looked directly into his mother's eyes. In her once bright blue eyes, there was now weariness and disappointment. I shouldn't have listened to you. I shouldn't have lost Olivia. I shouldn't have... Ethan faltered, a lump rising in his throat. But what hurt most was realizing how long he had allowed his mother to control his life. Eleanor narrowed her eyes slightly, as if hearing defiance in her son's voice for the first time. Alarm flickered in her eyes. Ethan took a breath like a diver before plunging into the abyss. I'm leaving. Eleanor straightened up sharply. What did you say? There was metal in her voice. Ethan glanced around the mansion. Paintings in massive frames, expensive furniture, ornate decor. He once thought he couldn't live without it. Now it all seemed like a golden cage. I'm leaving, he repeated slowly, enunciating each word. I can't anymore. I don't know where. I don't know what I'll do, but staying here is beyond my strength. Eleanor jumped to her feet. Her usual composure cracked. You're acting like a madman, Ethan. Do you think you can just give it all up? Cross that threshold, and you'll be deprived of your inheritance, everything I've created for you. There was an undisguised threat in her voice. Ethan smirked, but there was no joy in that smirk. It was the grimace of a man who had reached the point of no return. You're right. If I leave, I'll lose everything I have. But you know what? I lost the most important thing a long time ago. With those words, he turned sharply, grabbed his coat from the rack, and strode purposefully towards the mansion's exit. This time, no one rushed after him. No one stood frozen in the doorway, begging him to stay. Only a solitary figure disappeared from that luxurious, ostentatious world, without which he once thought he couldn't breathe. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt an intoxicating sense of freedom, as if an unbearable burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The morning sun, streaming through the huge windows, bathed my spacious yet cozy home in a soft golden light. The children's ringing laughter, like music, filled the air, intertwined with the delicate aroma of freshly brewed coffee. I sat at my desk, my fingers dancing lightly across the keyboard, my eyes skimming the final edits to the contracts for Little Blessings, the brand I had created from scratch, pouring my heart and soul into it. It had been a long road to this day, from a lonely, desperate mother, abandoned to fate at the most difficult moment. I had become a successful businesswoman, written about in glossy magazines, extolling female entrepreneurs and their daring startups. Little Blessings had outgrown the modest confines of an online children's clothing store. Now it was a brand known throughout the country, its products adorning the shelves of America's largest retail chains. I had even opened two chic flagship stores in the heart of New York City and Los Angeles, which had become a true mecca for young mothers looking for exquisite clothing for their little ones. Every day was scheduled down to the minute, but I didn't feel a trace of fatigue. After all, everything I had was the fruit of my own efforts, hard-won and deserved. No one handed it to me on a silver platter. I didn't rely on anyone. And most importantly, I no longer needed Ethan's support. On the very day he left the Sterling estate, leaving behind the luxury he clung to so desperately, I had no idea. Only much later did I hear rumors that he had renounced his inheritance, severed all ties with his mother, and decided to start life with a clean slate. But it no longer mattered to me. I no longer thought of him with resentment. I didn't care what he was doing or feeling. He no longer existed in my universe. He was a shadow of days gone by, but I no longer allowed that shadow to darken my life. That sunny day, I took my children to the park where they, like restless butterflies, flitted across the emerald carpet of grass. Their ringing laughter, pure and carefree, echoed in the air. I sat comfortably on a bench, sipping coffee slowly, enjoying the peace I had fought so hard to achieve. Suddenly, a woman sat down next to me and gave me a sincere, welcoming smile. "You're Olivia, right?" she asked with a twinkle in her eye. "The founder of Little Blessings?" I nodded in response, involuntarily smiling. "Oh my God, I'm your devoted fan!" she exclaimed, not hiding her delight. "I've been following your story for quite some time. It's just incredible, inspiring. You've been able to do what many women only dream of: break free from the clutches of pain, be reborn, and achieve stunning success." Her words, like a warm ray of sunshine, touched my heart. I was a little flustered by such recognition, but a warmth of gratitude spread throughout my body. "I was just doing what I had to do," I replied modestly. "I didn't let circumstances break me and define my destiny." The woman nodded understandingly, her eyes shining. "Thank you for sharing your story. You've given hope and strength to so many people." I watched her go, my heart overflowing with feelings. I never thought my life could inspire someone, but now I understood. Everything I had created was not just a way to feed my children or make a living. I had become a symbol of resilience, a woman who did not allow the past to define her. That evening, I sat on the sofa in the living room, my two treasures snuggled up to me like kittens. I began to tell them a bedtime story, but not about princes and princesses, but about a woman who rose from the ashes, overcame all obstacles, and forged her own happiness. "And did she become happy, Mommy?" my little girl whispered, her huge, naive eyes looking up at me. I smiled, gently kissing her on the forehead. "Yes, my dear, she created her own happiness." Turning off the light and leaving the nursery, I lingered in the doorway, admiring how my children slept peacefully. They are all I need. I don't need a man to feel complete. I don't need a knight to come and save me. I saved myself. Everything I have become, all my happiness, my future, I created it myself. For the first time in years, I felt that my destiny was in my own hands. Life rarely goes according to plan, but it is how we meet the blows that shapes us. Olivia, thrown to the very bottom, managed to rise, refusing to be a prisoner of the past. She didn't need a knight in shining armor, nor the support of a man who had once betrayed her. Her success, her joy, her freedom, all were her personal triumph. This isn't a story of revenge or bitterness, but of growth, resilience, and a triumphant return to oneself. It's an anthem to the strength and perseverance of a woman who defied fate.